Hey guys, and welcome back to Ellyonart Gaming. For this video I decided to build my own Silvermoon style staircase in the Midnight Beta. I'm showing the full speed build, all the decorating and all the little details with a little commentary. Before we dive into the build, I want to quickly mention how the Midnight Beta launch went. The start was pretty rough, the servers didn't work for almost 2 hours after launch and half of the time I couldn't even get in, and character copies kept failing too. So eventually I just gave up, went to sleep and started building the next day. So yeah, bumpy start, but once things settled I could finally begin. Since this is still beta, my item options are really limited and a lot of pieces I wanted to use for this build are locked behind the new reputation, so I can't access them yet. I honestly think the whole staircase would look even better with some of those rep items, but I worked with what I had and I'm still happy with how it turned out. So you will see me working on the base of the staircase, and I was still figuring out how tall I wanted it to be and how many floors it should have. I used the Silvermoon platforms, both large and small ones, to create the foundation. I'm not an architect or anything like that, but I do have some experience from games like Palia or The Sims, so over time I've picked up a few little tricks for combining items or using them in creative way. I will talk more about those in a future video. And yes, I know there is a preset staircase you can just drop in, but I don't really like being limited to basic shapes. I like experimenting and building things in my own style, because this way I can make any shape I want and any height I want and basically any layout I imagine. Also, I built this entire staircase in around 5 hours with very limited beta items, so just imagine what's going to be possible once we have the full arsenal of new housing items on the live servers. I also decorated the outside of the house similar to what I did on Alpha. This time I went with more human style theme. I didn't record that part, but you will see the finished footage at the end of this video. After finishing the base, I used the same Silvermoon platforms to make railing around the stairs, basically the safety borders so you don't fall off. Then I kept building and adjusting the structure until it looked right. I wanted it to look good, not only from the inside but also from the outside, so when you walk in, you don't see random floating blocks or weird edges sticking out. Everything should feel clean and intentional. Once I was happy with the shape, I started decorating. I added greenery to the railing, but it looked just a little bit empty on its own. So I added more flowers around the edges and I rotated them so it looks more natural and slightly overgrown. Here I'm just finalizing the basic shape and adjusting the layout of the upper platform. It's supported by the Silvermoon pillar, but right now the pillars aren't scalable, and neither are the walls. I was able to scale both pillars and walls during alpha, so I'm hoping this is just a temporary beta bug and it's gonna get fixed before everything goes live. Then I added the elegant elven railing to the round platforms and adjusted all parts of the build to match the angles and curves of the staircase. Here I'm using the platforms again, but this time I'm scaling them down and turning them into a railing. I had to make sure everything lined up evenly so there were no edges sticking out. This part was honestly pretty tedious because it needed to look right from the top and from the bottom, and nothing could be poking out anywhere. It took a bit of a time to get it all clean and consistent, but eventually it came together. For the edge of the railing, I used the Silvermoon beam and rotated it 90 degrees. This gives the railing a really clean finish, and it also lets you place items on top for extra detail, which we will be doing later on. Once I was happy with the basic structure and the plants, it was time to add lights. Lighting always makes the biggest difference. You can decorate as much as you want, but the moment you start adding light sources, the whole build suddenly feels alive. It adds depth, atmosphere, and makes everything look a lot more magical. So I started placing different types of light around the staircase, some warm, some cooler, and a few in Silvermoon style colors just to match the theme. Then I added a couple of barrels on the floor and turned them into a planter. I also added few flowers to the hanging plants we made earlier, just to give them some extra detail. And then I went back to the barrels and filled them with plants, and I used blue ones to add a little bit of contrast since everything else was mostly white and red already. After that, I moved on to creating the wall planters. Since I don't have many planters available, I had to improvise. I took a table, flipped it upside down and sunk it halfway into the wall. It works perfectly as a planter. You can get really creative with this system, you don't have to use items exactly as they are. A lot of furniture pieces can become something completely different if you rotate them or bury them into the walls, furniture or the floor. I used the same planter idea for a wall light as well. I placed a couple of light sources inside it and it actually looks like a decorative wall lamp. It adds a cozy touch and it fills up the space without looking too empty. Then I moved onto the upper floor and started decorating it as a little sitting area. I flushed a rug into the table so it blends nicely with the rest of the furniture and added few more decorations around it. You'll also see me adding some carpets and layering them on top of each other. This is actually a trick I learned from Blizzard themselves, because if you look around the wall they've designed, they often layer carpets instead of just placing a single one. I did the same with the curtains as well. Layering items adds more depth and visual interest, and it helps the space feel less flat and more intentional. You'll see me adding a few more light sources around the area. I also wanted some little bits and pieces hanging from the wall to fill up the space a bit more and to add some extra atmosphere. Next, I added an enchanted parchment and I placed it right at the entry of the stairs so it stands out immediately. I like the idea of it being sort of a guest book, like a parchment with the signatures of everyone who visited the house. Underneath it, I used a small moon well and I sunk it into the floor so only the spell effect shows. Just be extra careful when doing this, because if you sink items too far away into the wall or the floor, you might lose access to them and not be able to recover them again. Next, I moved on to the mage corner. I knew I wanted to build one somewhere, but I wasn't sure where it would fit the best. And the empty space underneath the stairs ended up being perfect, so that's where I built it. I started by hanging a few banners, then I experimented with the spell effects and added some floating books. I also added a book in the middle to make it look like a spell is being cast. I filled the area with some plants, books and bookshelves and make it all come together. And I also added another chandelier underneath the stairs for an extra lighting. And finally, I created a little fence around the whole mage area to make it feel more enclosed. This also helps separate that space from the rest of the build so it doesn't look out of place. I added some extra flowers onto the fencing just like we did earlier. Then I moved back to the main entryway and added curtains. I layered 3 of them to make the archway look fuller, and I really like how the overhang frames the entrance. I also decorated the mage corner a bit more with extra flowers. And just a tip, you can rotate your flowers 90 degrees and lay them flat on the table and shelves. They don't always have to go in planters or on the ground. By scaling them down and placing them horizontally, you can create completely new decorative pieces for surfaces. Next, I moved onto the entryway. My idea here was that when you leave the house, you're basically preparing for a battle. So I placed a weapon rack by the door and I decorated around it. Hopefully, in the future we will be able to put actual weapons onto that. I also made some wall shelves by sinking the elegant curved table into the wall, and used barrels again as vases for flowers. Then I added a hanging plant above it and, of course, more lighting. If you're enjoying this build and want a full step-by-step tutorial, including all the housing items you will need, just let me know in the comments down below and I'll put one together. Upstairs, I expanded the seating area by adding more pillows. Later on, I also placed benches underneath the pillows so they are actually functional and you can sit on them. I then extended the big chandelier even more and added extra lanterns to fill up the space and brighten the whole upper floor. There are still a few things I'd love to add to this build, like curtains and some extra Silvermoon details, but those are locked behind the Midnight reputation. Once everything is available on live servers, I'll definitely come back and upgrade this. I really wish we had some kind of housing loadout system, because I'll have to rebuild this all over again. Alright, that's everything, and now let's move on to the final shots. If you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. Please hit the like and subscribe button and I'll see you in the next one.